Stan Krpan is the CEO of Sustainability Victoria. They deliver environmental sustainability programs to the government of Victoria on planning and support for integrated waste management, recycling, resource efficiency. And you have the floor, sir.
Thanks, Bess. Well, good morning, everybody. And can I firstly start by commending Damien and his colleagues here at the UTS and also in partnership with the UNSW on really what I think is a fantastic conference, even though we're only a day and a half in. But also I think the leadership and how important this conference is from Australia's perspective. I'm going to be sharing a perspective based on my organisation. Sustainability Victoria is a relatively small program delivery agency in the environmental sustainability space, or a government agency in Victoria. And really sharing some perspectives based on that program experience, working with quite diverse sectors, and really drawing out three themes, which I think hopefully will resonate certainly in terms of the panel discussions. The first is around integration, the second is on focus and remaining focused, and the third is around collaboration. SV has been around for about 10 years. We work predominantly in energy and materials efficiency and in the waste and recycling space. So our programs are focused in those areas. Our statutory responsibility is to promote environmental sustainability in the use of resources. But we've deliberately targeted energy and materials in the context of a very mature sector for water efficiency in Victoria with other government agencies, retailers, etc. And so part of what I'll be sharing with you is that focus. In terms of how we've thought about the circular economy, we're in the middle of developing a strategy, SV 2020, which will see us into the next 5 years. And our staff use this diagram, which is really based on the Ellen MacArthur model for the circular economy, really to inform our thinking about where we should prioritise and focus over the next 5 years. And it's trying to integrate those areas that we work in, so energy and materials, but also in the waste space. For the last 3 or 4 years, we've certainly focused on two focus areas: integrated waste management, which includes recycling and resource recovery, and resource efficiency, as I said, around energy and materials. But from our staff's perspective, integrating those two and wanting to see those mature and seeing the linkages was something that was top of mind in the development of a new strategy. And you'll see some common elements there from the Ellen MacArthur model: design and generation, distribute and sell, usage obviously in the consumer interface, recovery and reprocessing, and disposal and loss in the systems at a number of different points. And what they were looking for was really similarities between energy usage and generation obviously in that cycle and materials. And a particular area of focus for the next 5 years is not only the nexus but really some of the intersection points that occur between energy and materials. So from our perspective, particularly around use, around disposal and loss, and also about things like energy from waste, which is part of our sort of program delivery. And it allows us to think not only about our work and how we integrate those two aspects of our responsibilities, but also about where we would target interventions, bearing in mind that we're a government agency that is focused on market failures and addressing those. So by way of example, I've used effectively a product, tyres, end-of-life tyres, and in Victoria we generate about 11 million tyres every year in terms of waste and disposal. About half of them, in fact more than half, are not accounted for in terms of our statistics. So it's a huge environmental problem. Most of them are deposited in stockpiles. We actually don't know how big the stockpiles are. And I don't say that because I like whipping myself over the back with sort of bad news, but in fact these stockpiles occur in developed economies all over the world. Victoria is just one, I think, that is trying to grapple with this issue, and I think many developed economies are. So 11 million end-of-life tyres, they're a huge environmental concern. Clearly in a drought-ridden state like the southeast of Australia and Victoria, it's a huge fire risk. Obviously there's all sorts of other concerns environmentally as well. But the other issue, and I think this might be something we just explore in the panel as well, is that a lot of that, and as I say, we can't actually account for it all, is offshored. And in some cases for energy, in some cases we actually don't know the destination, and you shudder to think of where they might go. So how have we addressed this in terms of that sort of integrated thinking between our energy, materials efficiency and waste? So traditionally we'd approach this as a waste and recycling problem, and it's not a waste and recycling problem, it's in fact a cyclical problem. So in terms of some of our work, the diagram on the top right of that is how we would traditionally address it, which is through infrastructure. So a direct investment in a company called Tyre Cycle in the north of Melbourne, a $500,000 investment that is trying to improve the shredding capacity of effectively their equipment in terms of improving recycling rates and obviously the value add of tyre crumb from remaindered tyres. We've also put in the top left of that screen is a dump of about 8 million tyres in a town called Stawell, which is near the Grampians, has very little water supply and it's a huge fire risk. In that context, this is a problem that has been growing for the last 10 or so years, and the council, the state government and a number of commercial operators are working together to try and develop effectively a feasibility study about what you do with something like that that's been there for so long, that, as I say, is a huge environmental problem. But thinking around that cycle in terms of design and generate, so not just improving recycling rates and resource recovery and the development of tyre crumb, but we're also supporting research and development, and I'll share an example with Steve Morris from Close the Loop, who's in the audience, about how we're actually trying to collaborate across the value chain and with really commercial operators, both new entrants as well as partnerships with existing players that are trying to find end uses for these products, and not only value add but also looking at feasibility as well as commercialisation of new products to improve the demand or the pool, if you like, of the products and materials through the supply chain. And in terms of distribution and sale, we have, since its inception, been a supporter of the Tyre Stewardship Australia scheme, which is effectively trying to extend producer responsibility. I say producers, most of the tyres are in fact not manufactured in Australia, they're either imported or distributed and obviously retailed in Australia, but trying to extend responsibility through the commercial supply chain to prevent the stockpiles of the future. So not only working on the current stockpiles, but also that continuous supply. Incidentally, Victoria is about a quarter of the market for end-of-life tyres in terms of usage, and the mining sector is actually quite a huge generator of the equivalent of passenger tyres. In terms of use and procurement, and this is something that we're trying to promote with the Tyre Stewardship Australia, but we're effectively agnostic about the sort of consumer demand, and I think that's something that would be worth exploring in the panel discussion, is the influence of consumers on the use of products and recycled material, and as we heard earlier, in terms of our demand effectively and the fickleness of some of the demand for some products and materials without thinking of the supply chain and where those, the provenance of where those materials come from. So in that context, in terms of improving use and procurement, the Victorian Government has signed up effectively to support the Tyre Stewardship scheme by preferencing retailers and distributors of tyres that have signed up to the Tyre Stewardship scheme, effectively trying to close that loop around tyres and to incentivise obviously responsible handling practices, but also to make some money available for future R&D, and I'll talk about some examples. So the second point that I wanted to make is around focus. Coming to conferences like this and having been in this game for the last sort of 5 or 6 years, I'm sure you're just like me. When I come to a conference like this, I feel like a kid in a lolly shop. You hear thousands of ideas, and I have people approaching me every day with interesting ideas, R&D, products, materials, people that have got technologies to sell that are fantastic and innovative and real geniuses in this context as well. As a small organisation, you can't do all of that. We're pretty realistic and practical about what we can do, and we've deliberately targeted certain products and materials, and we've based them really on some quite acute environmental problems in the state. They're not dissimilar if you were to compare them with the list of products and materials that the EPA or the Office Environment and Heritage is focusing on here in New South Wales, and I'm sure in other contexts around other developed economies. So in terms of those products and materials, I won't go through all of them, but they're on that list. And effectively, the decision-making process in prioritising those was around the environmental hazard, and clearly we focused on the most acute rather than the latent ones, on the biggest problems in terms of volumes and weight, but also in terms of the value to the economy potentially, because, as I said, we were trying to focus on some examples that could lead to the demand or the pull, as well as the push that is developed often by recycling without context for the downstream effects of our recycling activities. So they're the target, I guess, products and materials. I talked about our two focus areas over the last three years, which are around waste and recycling and then resource efficiency. So we've run a program that is a business support program largely focused on energy and materials efficiency for that 3 years. We deliberately targeted that towards medium-sized business. Why? There's 20,000 medium-sized businesses in Victoria. Our definition is between 20 and 200 employees. We realised that as a relatively small agency, we just couldn't possibly directly reach 500,000 small businesses that exist in the state, and that at the large end of town, firstly, there were regulatory interventions in Victoria that required them to do energy and materials efficiency. There were some great case studies, but it didn't make sense for an organisation focused on voluntary behaviour change like SV to focus on that area, but actually borrowing some of that and then applying it to an area where we could get some scale. So we got to 1 in 20 medium-sized businesses, but also where we could draw out some of those synergies between waste and recycling, energy and materials. That program is now in a phase where we're actually promoting some of the case studies. They're all up on our website. There's about 23, and I'll share with you one of them. What was really interesting about that context is that SV for many years has worked in the energy efficiency space, and we thought that that was the area where we might be able to make a difference to the bottom line of companies. And sure enough, we did. So for those companies that we worked on with energy audits, which are well established, there's a very strong market around energy auditors and expert advice. About $60,000 per business we were able to save, in some cases with an investment of as little as $2,000 of government money. What was really interesting, though, was for a maximum of about $15,000 to pay for a resource assessment, we saved businesses on average with our recommendations $160,000. So directly contributing to the bottom line of those businesses in terms of materials efficiency, but also actually drawing out case studies that we think apply across the supply chain. We also deliberately, although the program was broad-based and open to all medium-sized businesses, we naturally and deliberately focused on areas that were both energy and materials intensive, so manufacturing, food and beverage manufacturing, and agribusiness. And we found, in fact, that the take-up in those industries was fantastic, and some real leadership shown by the businesses that we worked with. And of particular interest, I think, in terms of how you try and encourage collaboration and co-location of like-minded businesses is around regional centres. And I'll draw that out with this case study, which is RPM Pipes. So RPM Pipes is a small family-run business, I should say medium-sized, relatively small business that is family-owned in Krpan, which is in the north of Victoria. It effectively produces agricultural pipe, so pipes for agricultural purposes out of HDPE, so high-density polyethylene, which largely comes and it's sourced from the recycling market, so effectively hard plastics that are in detergent bottles, in milk bottles, Coke bottles, that sort of stuff. So they process that. This business did not come to us because it was a recycling business. It came because we were supporting businesses in terms of energy and materials efficiency. So we were able to improve their materials efficiency by about 15% and energy efficiency by 12%. So the business suddenly becomes more viable in a context where you're trying to preserve jobs in country, Australia, let alone in Victoria, particularly in the manufacturing context, but in a setting where it's remote from Melbourne, but where it can leverage synergies with obviously regional recycling products and materials with its supply chain. So it's a fantastic business, and it's a great case study in terms of the product really being close to their customers, which is, I think, is one of the other areas of interface around innovation, is actually knowing your customers. And these guys working directly with farmers, knowing their specs and knowing how their product performs in the context of products manufactured from virgin materials. So effectively a win-win. And then the final point I wanted to make is around collaboration. So I mentioned, obviously, we're a government organisation, but being realistic about realising some of the potential of circular thinking, at least, if not the circular economy, is that the lead times, particularly around R&D, and Steve knows this incredibly well, are long. So the perseverance, the trial and error, the innovation that goes with it means that you can't do anything alone. And indeed, I don't think any in the complexity that we're dealing with, which is growing exponentially, that any one organisation, any one individual, even one country like Australia can deal with. So you're actually trying to encourage collaboration across supply chains, across countries, but also between companies. And what we see as our role is that we can actually facilitate or accelerate some of that collaboration. So we can be a third party and a trusted third party that brings some of those together, or that in fact is encouraging, nurturing, promoting great examples of collaboration. So the case study that I mentioned earlier in the day, earlier in my presentation, is Close the Loop. So Close the Loop has been around for at least 10 years, Steve, and is a privately owned company, but is a company that we've worked closely in terms of supporting the commercialisation of a new product, effectively trying to increase recycled asphalt product. So it's essentially licenses a trademark called TonerPave, which is using printer cartridge toner in recycling. Their latest project, which we've been supporting, is trying to encourage the use of paint, waste oils, cartridge toner, and also tyre crumb in asphalt. And this week they'll be launching Australia's first 99% recycled asphalt product in a road, and based on our sort of understanding, and certainly what we're trying to prove with the commercialisation and the feasibility studies, demonstrating that in fact has either equal to or better than the performance specs of using virgin products in recycled asphalt. Asphalt. Our work has also been trying to encourage the use of concrete, brick and glass in both recycled concrete products, but also in pavements and roads, particularly around recycled asphalt. And we're working really closely, again, trying to collaborate across sectors. So with the state government, with Vic Roads, which is effectively they both manufacture roads and lay them, as well as they set the specifications that apply to local government, which is a huge consumer of this material and lays its own roads. So the Municipal Association of Victoria, obviously SV in partnership, trying to promote both the use up to 25% of recycled content in new concrete substrates, but also trying to promote case studies of councils that are really leading the way in this context. So as I mentioned with the start of this slide, the lead times and the research and development that's needed are actually quite long, and the opportunities in Australia, I think, are huge. Although they are complex, it's certainly my belief that ultimately this is something where there are huge opportunities not only for our economy but our environment, and that's certainly something that I'm happy to explore in the panel session. Thank you.